Greetings and salutations, and welcome back to my socially isolated kitchen, where this month I'm finally tackling sourdough bread. It's been a long journey over the past month, a lot of failures, but I think I've finally got a good starter. You can see that there's lots of nice little bubbles in there, so hopefully this one is going to work. I tried a few different recipes. The first one I tried, it really appealed to me because it didn't discard a lot of starter every day, which most recipes do, and I don't like the amount of waste that's involved in that. But it never really got off the ground, and because I was inexperienced with sourdough, I just followed the instructions to the letter, and by day 5 it was supposed to be ready, so I went ahead and tried to make the bread. And of course, after a whole day process of making the bread, it didn't really rise. It looked beautiful, it had a great crust, and when I cut the bread near the edges, it had a really great flavor, but once you cut into the bread, you could see that there was no rise at all. It was just like this big lump. So I tried it differently the second time, using the same recipe, but I tweaked it a little, and same thing happened. It actually rose even less. So then I finally decided, okay, I'm done with that recipe, and I went and found a new one, looked at a few different ones, and I finally settled on the King Arthur flour recipe. And it seemed to be working, but it was still going pretty slow. And then I read in the comments that it can take up to a couple of weeks, not just the 5 or 6 days. So you have to be patient, and it was just like, ugh, I really don't enjoy this, because with the sauerkraut, it was simple. I put it in the jar, I mixed it, and I sealed it up, and I waited a month, and I didn't have to tinker with it, and after a month, bang, I had fermented sauerkraut. This is just, sourdough is just, you've got to feed it every day, and if the temperature isn't right, if it's too cold, it's like, oh, it's too cold, I'm not going to rise, and if the water's the wrong pH, it's like, oh, I'm not going to rise. And so it's, now that I finally got one that seems to be working, it's a little more enjoyable, but getting there was bleh. Anyway, so I've tried, as I was saying, I tried the King Arthur flour recipe, and it was taking a long time. I was like, oh, I don't want to wait the 2 weeks, and it had, the temperature outside had chilled down again, and so the kitchen, it usually runs pretty cold in here, so I tried to warm it up a little bit in here, and I got it too close to the heat, and so it ended up cooking. And so had to toss that one. And then in the meantime, I had read that a lot of people use pineapple juice or orange juice or even apple cider, anything sort of acidic, in place of the water. And I had been sort of hesitant to go that route because with the first recipe that I tried, it had explained that some people use yogurt, and that's considered cheating. So I didn't want to do anything that was considered cheating, but then after all of that, I was like, screw it. I'm going with the orange juice. I had some clementines on hand, so I squeezed it in, and I didn't have quite enough, so I topped it off with water. But finally seemed to have a starter that is working. So after all that, now I'm going to give the bread a try. Still sticking with the King Arthur flour recipe, and I've decided to have the recipe because the recipe makes 2 loaves, and I don't want to make 2 loaves if it's not going to work out. So I've halved it, like I said. I've got 2.5 cups all-purpose unbleached flour, and 3/8 of a cup of whole wheat flour, and 7/8 of a cup, oh, that's a little bit much, 7/8 of a cup of room temperature water and 1 cup of starter. And mix that all together. Just going to manhandle it a bit because I want to get all those last little scraps in there without kneading it too much at this point. And now we let it sit for 20 minutes covered so that the flour can absorb the water before and help to start developing the gluten before we start kneading it. Set timer. Also, I went with a kneading recipe this time because I had the failed recipes were no knead recipes, and even though I've had success with no knead recipes for regular yeast bread in the past, I don't want to screw with things this time, and plus kneading stuff is it's a good workout, and after all this time isolated, could use a little workout. So be back in 20 minutes. While the dough is autolyzing, I might as well go over the steps for getting the starter to this point, now that I think I've managed to do it successfully. It takes about 5 or 6 days. It can take longer, but I actually managed to pull it off in that time frame finally with the aid of the orange juice. So the first day, and actually I did it at nighttime instead of starting in the morning. So I did it about 9 or 10 at night, and I'll explain why in a bit. So the first night I put in half a cup of whole wheat flour with a 1/4 cup of the liquid, which, as I mentioned, was the freshly squeezed orange juice, which I had topped off with a little bit of water. You stir that vigorously, make sure it's all incorporated, and then you cover it with the cheesecloth so that it gets some air. And you can get that at Dollarama for $1 or so. And then you just let it sit, and 24 hours later, then you add, you don't have to discard at this point because I actually halved the amount for the first, because why bother discarding on the first night if you don't have to. So the second night I added 1 cup of all-purpose flour this time around, unbleached, and half a cup of room temperature water, and mix that in, and let that sit for another, covered for another 24 hours. So then night 3, you discard about half of it and do the same thing. Another cup of all-purpose unbleached flour and half a cup of room temperature water. Stir that in, and then with the discard, there's all kinds of recipes which you can use, like pancakes or crumpets or focaccia, pizza dough, all kinds of stuff. And I actually did make pancakes one night, and they were okay. I prefer my regular recipe, but I've ended up just discarding the rest because, especially now when we're all locked in and nothing to do, why come up with extra reasons to, or extra recipes for more carbohydrates? So night 4, same thing. You discard half of it, actually a little more than half because you only want about a cup left in there, and then add another cup of flour, another half cup of water, Same thing night 5. And I actually went an extra, even though it was looking pretty good, I went an extra day just to be safe. Night 6. And that was last night. And this is why I did it at night. It's because after that final feeding, when you think it's looking good, you're supposed to wait another 8 hours or so. And so that way I was able to get up today, and there it was, ready for me to start rather than having to wait later on in the day. So that's where I am now. All right, 20 minutes is up. So at this point we add in 1 1/4 teaspoons of salt, and just mix it in with your hands, and now we begin the kneading process. Now in the recipe it says knead until smooth and supple yet soft and tacky, whatever that means. From my experience in making yeast breads in the past, it's usually about 5 to 8 minutes worth of kneading. This recipe didn't specify a time, so we'll just play it by ear. And just back and forth, and really put your back into it. Now it's already starting to feel smooth and supple, but still soft and tacky. So we may not need as long as 5 to 8 minutes, but let's see, I can still sort of feel salt grains here and there. I want to make sure they're properly incorporated. Okay, I've given that about 4 or 5 minutes. I don't want to over knead it. I'm a little worried about that. So now we put it back in the bowl and let it sit for another hour. Covered, of course. And okay, I just screwed up. The camera, I had it in photo mode instead of video mode, so the last step didn't get videoed. It's been an hour, and the board is lightly floured, and you take a bowl scraper and you fold it over, fold the dough over, and then you turn it 90 degrees, and then you fold it again. So you just fold it twice, and then you put it back in the bowl, cover it again, and you gotta let it sit for another hour. Okay, so it's been an hour and 20 minutes since I last left you. I gave it an extra 20 minutes because the next step after that was to divide the full recipe into 2 loaves and then give it another 20 minutes rest. But since I'm only doing half the recipe, I didn't have to do that. So now we have to shape it into the boule, which is the sort of typical round loaf that you always see. So you have to stretch it from one side towards the middle, and then you turn it, stretch it again, and turn it over, stretch it again, and then one last time, stretch it again, and then you sort of roll it over so that all those tucked ends go underneath, and you form it into a tight ball. And then you want to put it back into the bowl with parchment paper this time. Turn it upside down so the seams are up top. Actually, you know what? I'm going to put it into this bowl instead. And then we cover it again. And another 2.5 hours to go. I gave it an extra hour or so because it wasn't rising as much as I would have liked. It still doesn't look, I don't know, doesn't look as big as it should be. But it said let it rise until it's soft and poofy, so it's kind of airy, but we'll see. Now we have to turn this out again. Actually, we're supposed to turn it straight out onto parchment, but since I'm going to reuse this parchment, I'm just going to do a switcheroo. And there we go. And now we want to score it. The recipes showed using a razor blade, but I don't have any loose razor blades, so the next best thing, a loose fresh box cutter. And I want to score fairly deeply. It's much better than using a regular knife, or at least any of my regular knives, because I don't have any good knives. So you're not going to get any drag, you know, going through it fairly easily. And I'm just doing random sort of cuts here. Not going to make it too fancy, but maybe a little more than just a straight cut. Just cause. Oh, juniper! Alright, that'll do. I've preheated the oven at 450, and inside I've got a pizza stone that's been heating up along with it, and underneath the pizza stone I've got a cast iron pan that I'm going to fill with some boiling water to create steam. Now there's a couple of different options. A lot of them you'll see recommending putting the bread inside of a Dutch oven, and that bake covered, it creates the steam, which gives you a nice crust. And I've tried it that way, and it works well, but I figure I would give this way a try as well. I'm just going to cut away some of this excess parchment so it doesn't just burn in the oven while I'm reboiling my water. Alright, so I'm just going to use an old cake plate to slide this onto the pizza oven, and then put the boiling water into the pan. Try and do this as quickly as possible so that all of the heat doesn't escape. One. Alright, and now 40 minutes or so, and this should be done. Okay, it's time to take it out of the oven. I actually took a peek with the light on, and taking it out after 35 minutes instead of 40 because it's already quite brown. And here it is. Give it a tap here on the bottom. Has a nice hollow sound, which you're supposed to have. It's looking a little small, and it kind of tilted over on one side. It's split here on this side, which it wasn't supposed to do, but at least it did rise some. So now I'll let this cool and see what it tastes like. Hopefully it'll have a nice texture inside. It won't be like hard like a rock, but we'll see. Okay, it's time to cut into this and see if this has been a success or not. It's been a long day. Sounds nice. Oh, it's got a nice texture inside. One big old air bubble there. Smells nice too. Got some butter on the go. Well, it took a month to get here, but success. And now for the final act of the day, I'm going to feed this leftover starter again so we can keep the ball rolling. 1 more cup of all-purpose unbleached flour, 1/2 cup of room temperature water. Give it a big old stir, making sure there's no dry bits anywhere in there. Get it complete. Cover it back up. And that's it. All right, that's 2 fermentation challenges under my belt. I'm going to keep working on this sourdough and try different variations, adding things to it like nuts and raisins or dried cranberries. But besides that, I'm not quite sure what to do for my next video, if I do another video. Maybe you guys have some suggestions, something you'd like to challenge me to try. Let me know. Hey, just a quick little update. It's 48 hours later and I've made my second loaf. I've made a few changes and you might be able to tell that it's looking a little bigger than the last one. First change was I did knead it a little bit longer. I went for a full 8 minutes, and then the proofing times, I let it sit for a lot longer each time. The first raising, I went for 2 hours instead of a single hour, and then once I did that folding over thing, at which point this time I added some walnuts and raisins, and then I went for another full 2 hours, and then for the final time I went for 3.5 hours instead of 2.5, which I also did last time. And the other change I did was before I scored it, I sprinkled some flour on it, and that's just to give it a little extra texture. Some recipes do it, some don't. And so let's see what it looks like inside. Okay, so we've got a nice texture, a few more air bubbles this time. And some butter here. Still nice and warm. The walnuts and raisins give it a really nice taste. And although I liked the texture the first time around, this is slightly improved, a little bit softer, a little airier. So, another success. Pretty pleased with this. Alright, so that concludes the big sourdough experiment. It was a little rough going at first, but once I got the right combination of ingredients, the orange juice certainly helped. And also the right temperature in here, kept it warm in here. And also another thing I forgot to mention earlier was that I have been insulating my jar of starter with a tea towel. I just wrap it around to hopefully insulate it from any drafts or from the air conditioning. I don't know if it actually did anything or not, but since my starter finally worked, I think I'm going to keep doing that. And I'll write down all the ingredients and times and all of that for you, and let me know if you give it a try and how it turns out for you. In the meantime, stay safe, wash your hands, and if you're going to go outside, keep your distance and wear a mask. Bye for now.